Today we're picking up with Chapter 15, Citizenship in the Community. There are different kinds of communities in the U.S. When the American settlers first came to the U.S., or when the colonists first came to American territory, basically they were looking for locations that had some sort of natural advantage. So it had like fertile soil, or a harbor for trade, a nice climate, beaches, mountains, those kinds of things. That's what they were looking for. But from these advantages, they are going to find or found different types of communities. The first is a crossroads settlement. And a crossroads settlement is where two roads meet. It's a good place to set up to sell goods because you have multiple travelers coming from multiple different directions. And so people that set up businesses there to begin with were like inns or blacksmiths or a general store or something along that sort where they could make some money. The second type of community that is created are transportation centers, and kind of self-explanatory that these are around major transportation routes. So like waterways or ports. So cities like New York, Boston, Charleston, which were created around ports or major waterways. Major rivers will also start or become transportation centers for the creation of communities like Minneapolis and New Orleans on the Mississippi. Railroads will eventually also create their own transportation centers, even though it's not a natural occurrence. The railroad, as it expands, is going to crop up cities like Dallas and Denver. And then even cars, the invention of cars is going to create transportation centers. And the suburbs of today were created because cars were invented, so that you could travel from your work in the city to your home out in the suburbs where it was kind of nicer. The third type of community are climate and resource communities, and this is obviously based on the climate or the resources that are available to them. For example, here in the Midwest, a lot of communities crop up because of good soil, good farmland, and so people come to reap the benefits of that. On the West Coast, you see communities crop up because of forests, another resource. And in New England, a lot of communities because of water power. They have reservoirs and dams that could provide hydroelectric power and those kinds of things. The fourth kind of communities are rural communities, and rural communities are farms and small towns. And farms are going to differ from region to region. The farms, what we consider to be farms here in the Midwest or here in Iowa, would be very different from the farms that they would consider in Virginia or in Texas or in California. There's a whole different mindset of what a farm is. So, for example, in the South, you have tobacco and cotton plantations. In Hawaii, they're growing pineapple and sugarcane. In Wisconsin, it's dairy farms. And in the Midwest, we tend to have a lot of mixed farms where we have a variety of crops and animals being grown on the farms. We don't just specialize in one thing. Within these rural communities, like I said, it's farms and small towns. Well, what's a small town? A small town is a population of less than 2,500, and typically they're located near open farmland. So Remsen would be a perfect example because we're located near all this farmland around us, and we have a population of less than 2,500. Many people in these small towns leave the communities to find jobs in the big cities. There's not always a lot of jobs available here, so they travel elsewhere to find other jobs. But recently, we've seen a lot of growth in these small towns due to commuters wanting to live in the non-crowded cities. So they are willing to travel to the smaller towns. And the result is that you're going to get two types of rural communities. You have the old type, which is your rural farm community and your small country towns, kind of like what we have here in Remsen. But the second kind are the new type of rural communities, and this is farms just like in the old, but you also have a lot of businesses that have left the cities that are coming into these smaller communities and creating their business there because they're going to be able to avoid traffic and have lower housing costs and lower taxes and all that kind of stuff. The next type of community is a suburb. And suburbs are communities located on the outsides or the outskirts of a city. Why do people choose to live there? Well, typically there's more open space for children. It's a smaller community, so you know your neighbors more and you're more aware of who they are. You can have a house with a backyard. You can get away from crowds. You can get away from the noise and pollution and the traffic of the big cities. So that's why suburbs have gotten a lot of popularity. The sixth type are urban areas, and urban areas are communities of more than 2,500 people. About 3/4 of Americans live in urban communities, so 75% of Americans live in urban communities, and that actually is probably on the low side. I bet there's probably more now. I guess I haven't seen the most recent census data on that. Anyway, there are a lot of cultural advantages to living in an urban area. There's restaurants available, there's theaters, museums, all kinds of different entertainment, that kind of thing as well. Number 7, the seventh type of community are metropolitan areas. And metropolitan areas are very large urban areas. It's very difficult to tell where the city ends and then a suburb begins and other towns begin because they all kind of mesh together. And so a great example of metropolitan areas would be like New York City or LA or Chicago or Dallas. Minneapolis to some extent. It's hard to tell when the city stops, and then you get a suburb, and then it continues on. Eventually, these metropolitan areas can get so big that they become a megalopolis, and a megalopolis is a continuous train of metropolitan areas. And we have a great example on our East Coast of Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. They all just kind of meld into each other. If you ever get a chance to travel on the East Coast and you travel by car, it's really hard to tell when you've left New York or left Boston and gotten into Philadelphia. I mean, unless you're paying attention to the signs, it's kind of hard to tell because it does kind of fuse together in such a way that it's really hard to tell when you leave the city limits of one and enter the city limits of another. So, why do we have these communities? There are several different purposes for communities. Number 1, they teach us how to live and to work together. So, learning how to live together with other people, learning how to work together with other people, that's a valuable skill to have because then otherwise we'd be fighting all the time. The second is communication. It's much easier to pass information or ideas or beliefs from one person to another in a community than it is if we were all spread out and living on our own independently. But we have various means for doing that, like newspapers and TVs and radio and all that kind of stuff. The third purpose is recreation. Recreation is a relaxation or amusement by playing or doing something different than one's usual activity. So like sports or going to the theater or parks or going bowling, all kinds of stuff. But recreation serves a number of purposes. First off, it provides interesting and healthful things to do so that you can you don't get bored, but you're also keeping yourself active and engaged and sometimes in shape depending on what you're doing. The second is that it keeps the community physically fit. It also can expand the knowledge and it provides for relaxation and fun with others. Kind of gives you a break in your day sort of thing. The fourth is community services. Our communities provide us with services like a police force, school systems, fire department, garbage disposal, snow removal. They upkeep the roads, all kinds of stuff that they provide us with. And the fifth is that with a community, we have local government, and that local government is there to maintain the peace and order and to settle disputes. So all of this works together in creating a community in which you can display your citizenship.